Well, when I win the election, I think what I'm going to do is get a bunch of buses, and everybody here is going to get on them, and we're going to go down to Washington, and we're going to get Glass-Steagall reenacted, and we're going to repeal the NDAA, and we're actually going to put an end to these insane policies of war and overthrowing every dictator on the planet because they offended us or said we should eat our broccoli like Bush Sr. And we're going to have to take emergency measures to save the country. And you can say that one congresswoman out of 435 may not be much, but one who is aggressive and determined to get the job done can recruit other people, because I happen to know there are a lot of people on both sides of the aisle who agree with what we're saying, and they're gutless. And they're under pressure from Wall Street, and they're under pressure from the president, and they won't take a stand. But a few people taking a stand and sticking their neck on the line will inspire other people to take a stand. And it will probably be the case that I will need backup from my base in the 5th District to go down there and get this done, but that would be my intention.
And now we'll have
when I win this election and go down to Washington, I'm going to be focused. First and foremost, we have to start by reaching across the aisle. We have to start by coalition building. We have to start by getting individuals to understand that we can pass pieces of legislation that transcend partisan ideology and will actually do things for the American people.
The constitutional principle is this: he can't invade another country without consulting Congress and asking for their permission. The resolution says that if he does this again, he will face impeachment. Do you support that position?
Well, I appreciate you introducing yourself at the beginning, letting me know that you're supporting Diane's campaign, so I'll take the bait. Here's what I'll say to you. Here's what's deeply troubling to me. It's troubling to me when I walk outside and I see pictures of our president with a Hitler mustache. That troubles me. It's troubling to me that we're calling for the impeachment of a president, where in this democracy, if you are very much against what the president is doing and the actions that he's taking, then run against him. As a matter of fact, by asking for the impeachment of the president, you yourself are tacitly supporting his re-election. So I thank you for that. But if you don't agree with his actions, run a candidate against him. I don't think that his actions in Libya were unconstitutional. I can tell you as a service member that I appreciate him not putting boots on the ground, because I was in the infantry. And if we can utilize the technology that we have to stop genocide, to stop atrocities across the globe, and we can do it in a way that clearly Congress, though there are a lot of arguments out there that it may have been unconstitutional, they haven't taken actions. So perhaps those actions were not unconstitutional. They have not impeached the president. But there's got to be a better way than just going out and putting Hitler mustaches on the president and saying that we need to impeach him. If you firmly feel that way, then I would urge you to run a candidate against him, rather than saying impeach him. I see no cause.
If Obama succeeds in unleashing a thermonuclear war, he will kill people orders of magnitude more than Hitler. However, the mustache actually was put on Obama because of his health care plan, which seems to be modeled on the T4 useless eaters idea. And this is the fight over the Independent Payment Advisory Board. And by the way, I would support Walter Jones' HCR 107 because it is an impeachable offense for a nation to lead a country into war without authorization of the Congress. On the Independent Payment Advisory Board, the idea of having a group of people, statisticians, determine whether it is a worthwhile investment for someone to have health care, to get life-saving treatment that they need based on their age, their weight, if they smoke. And to make this decision now when we've spent $29 trillion on bailouts, and to say that people who have nothing to do with the family, nothing to do with the doctors, are going to determine whether a person has a right to health care is a slippery slope which was brought up at the Nuremberg tribunals. And it is a question of what people think is the value of human life in this country.
Something about Glass-Steagall. What is your position?
Let's understand, first and foremost, that, as I said in my intro, it was greed, short-sightedness, and corruption that got us into this mess. That's what it was. Glass-Steagall is a tremendous piece of legislation. I mean, huge. And it was a piece of legislation that was drafted and enacted for the early 20th century. If you look at what happened in the financial crisis of 2008, we had banks handling financial instruments that they didn't understand. We had people who were trying to make a quick buck. We had banks that were putting all their eggs in one basket. We'll call it the housing basket. And when it collapsed, the collateral that they had was our money. I don't think that we should have bailed out the banks. I think that we are in a situation where we need to have smarter regulation in Washington. You know, Glass-Steagall brought forth the FDIC. But to say that there should be a definitive separation between commercial banks and investment banks, I'll ask you to look up some of the banks that did actually survive the financial crisis. They were the ones that were diversified. And with Glass-Steagall, that diversification wouldn't have happened. There were power brokers on Wall Street that made horrible decisions. But we cannot solve these times by simply saying we need to enact Glass-Steagall. These times are much more complicated than the times when Glass-Steagall was initially enacted.
Yeah, sure. A year ago, Phil Angelides was the former treasurer of California, chaired a commission that investigated the causes of the collapse in 2008. And Glass-Steagall's repeal was not the only cause, but it was a substantial one, which occurred in 1999 or 98, as people may recall. And actually, I don't think it's the case that many of our institutions are actually solvent. This whole thing has been masked by what Neil Barofsky, the former Inspector General of the TARP, said, which is now we've spent $29 trillion on bailouts. So we're experiencing now hyperinflation in the prices of commodities, in the price of fuel, food, etc. If Glass-Steagall were to be reinstated, it would be a bloodbath for Wall Street. It would wipe out massive amounts of speculative money and banks, but that will not kill people. Cutting Social Security, cutting Medicare, cutting $4 trillion out of our budget because Standard & Poor's and Moody's are threatening to downgrade our debt and dictating policy to the United States, that will kill people. So reinstating Glass-Steagall is only the first step, but it's an urgently necessary one.
What is your stance on the constitutionality of the National Defense Authorization Act?
The NDAA was signed by Obama on New Year's Eve. It allows for the military, anyone that they consider to be a so-called terrorist, to be detained indefinitely without trial, and therefore it is strictly unconstitutional and should be repealed.
difficult question, I'm going to tell you, because we have detainees right now who are in Guantanamo Bay. We have individuals who we have denied rights to, and the reason that they are there is because the government doesn't know what to do with them. I don't think that there's a silver bullet that I can give you, because if we repeal it, I don't think it's going to change what is happening with those individuals who are in Guantanamo Bay. I said earlier, I believe that we should all have rights, but I can also tell you that when I go to war, as I've gone, and we go to war with rules, someone can fire at me, try to take my life, then throw down their weapon and wave a white flag. And because we go to rules with war, we abide by those rules, because we're not in our nation, but we are still wearing the flag of the United States of America. I don't believe that we should torture individuals. I don't think that we should hold individuals and detain them without charging them. But I can tell you that we have gone so far down this path, down this rabbit hole, that simply repealing that piece of legislation is not going to solve the problem that we're in. It will stop us from making mistakes moving forward, but it's not as simple as that. And I want everyone to understand that the issues that we're talking about aren't going to be surmised in 2 minutes. If they could be, I'm sure that one of the 436 people, either the President, the members of Congress, or the Senate, would have at least gotten somewhere close to the right answer. But they haven't. So,
Am I allowed to remote?
No, that's go ahead.
We'll make sure the back.
This is directed to you, Jason. There are 3 times and there are 3 pieces of legislation that you've taken the position that we've gone so far down this path that institute a single payer, the NDAA and Glass-Steagall, and we've gone so far past that reinstating them or rescinding them won't do any good. Frankly, I find that to be intellectually dishonest and completely confusing. So could you please help me to understand how you have arrived at this? Once we've gone down this path, we can't fix the position.
I think the first time I used down the rabbit hole was just here.
It's the same thing.
No, what I'm, and let me be clear, because
I'd like that. Sorry.
I've tried to be, and if I've been ambiguous, I apologize. These are not simple issues. You can't say to the children who are on their parents' health care right now, we're gonna repeal this piece of legislation. We're gonna repeal the Affordable Health Care Act, and you no longer have insurance. You can't. What I'm saying is that you add to the problem. You add to the problem by simply pulling the carpet from underneath someone. What we do in government is we recognize that pieces of legislation aren't perfect. What we do is we recognize, you can roll your eyes, and I'm just trying to be honest with you. And if you don't agree with my honesty, that is your prerogative. But what I'm saying to you is this: we have to exhaust every possible measure before we say to a student or to a child, we're taking you off your parents' health care. You now have it, tomorrow you don't, because we repealed it. We have, for someone who was in Iraq, for someone who was in the infantry, I can tell you that simply picking up and changing the course of action or changing direction is not always prudent. We owe it to the American people, we owe it to the students, we owe it to the individuals who are being adversely affected as well as benefiting from pieces of legislation to make sure that we're doing the right thing. I can only leave it there because they're complicated issues. I can't give you a silver bullet response. And if you think that there is a silver bullet to any one of these issues, and I'd be open to having a conversation with you so that you can educate me, because I don't know everything, but I will work my best for you.
Back.
Right now, it's my understanding that the nation is not in control of its own finances. So you have a financial crisis, Wall Street, etc. You've proposed a certain type of jobs project, corporate training, some other thing. You've proposed NAWAPA. I want to know if you're going to get rid of that form of financial control, Wall Street and the Federal Reserve, which means that the nation doesn't run its own finances. We're not our own nation. What do you replace that with? You mentioned the National Bank. I'm not sure what your answer is. But how do you fund these great projects? It's going to take a lot of work.
Go ahead.
Can we all agree that there's a lot of waste in Washington? That we're spending a lot of money in places that we probably shouldn't be spending it? I think that we can all probably come to agreement on that. For initiatives, I can't see the gentleman. Oh, you got to step out the way. We can free up funding by doing things smart. Now, I don't agree with returning to a fiat system and national money. I don't agree with that. But honestly, I don't necessarily understand everything that I read on your website about that aspect. And the issues are before us are more important than me going back to the website and trying to get a PhD on it. But what I will say to you is, what I will say to you is, yes, these projects are going to cost money, but we're wasting a lot of money right now.
First of all, I would say, in a sense, that money itself has no intrinsic value, so we're not going to address this by moving money from one thing to another. As Borowski says, we've issued $29 trillion so far, and I don't think anyone in this room, unless you're hiding something from us, has seen much of that $29 trillion. What Alexander Hamilton did was, after the American Revolution, our nation was in debt by $42 million, which was an enormous sum at the time. He consolidated that under the federal government, and then he went in debt even further, which is what would drive, Rand Paul and Garrett insane. He issued another $10 million in those days, $10 million of debt to invest in building roads, building canals, and building the ability to pay our European allies back for everything that we owed them. So the idea of national banking and credit is that, in a sense, your collateral is the future state of your economy, which is why a balanced budget amendment is insane. It has nothing to do with the American system of banking. That the government has the authority to issue credit, which is directed for internal improvements, and it will generate enough growth that not only you can pay off that debt, but as Hamilton found, he could pay off the $42 million from the American Revolution. We could pay off people's pensions and various things that have to be restored if we wrote off the speculative garbage, which would be eliminated with a reinstatement of Glass-Steagall.
And clearly we're going through a great crisis in the nation where there's no jobs, highest unemployment rate, even higher than the Great Depression right now. So what are we going to propose to the American people to bring a higher form of production back in this nation? Like, because you guys are running for Congress, you have to represent the nation as a whole.
Are you asking what are the candidates proposing for jobs, to create jobs?
Yeah, in the millions.
What's your proposal to create jobs? Okay.
This is not something that we can answer in 2 minutes. So let me just preface it by saying that if we could, it would have been done. Here's what I believe that we need to do. We need to create coalitions. We need to create coalitions between community colleges and universities and trade organizations and the companies that are actually creating jobs.
That requires, again, a return to Glass-Steagall and a credit system and a solvent banking system. Also, what I referenced earlier, NAWAPA, the North American Water and Power Alliance, which is a ready-to-go massive project that would employ over 4 million people, at least 100,000 in the 60s. They estimated 100,000. I imagine will be higher now because we've shut down so much of our machine tool capability, so much of our concrete production, our steel production. So 100,000 plus in the actual building, and a multiplier factor of millions in all of the places where you would have to build up civilization to support the workforce. Just as Lake Mead and the Hoover Dam was constructed at the time in the middle of nowhere and became a metropolis, the hub of NAWAPA in the United States is the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho. So it would be a massive driver for millions of jobs, and the nation needs a mission. That's how you get jobs, a mission and a purpose for the nation. Well, I would say that we currently have a president who is extreme. There is not a jot of difference between his policies and those of the previous administration. And I am sorely disappointed in the Democratic Party for refusing to stand up to these policies, because we might have had a different candidate had the party been willing to do that. So, and I am emphatically not supporting any of the Republican candidates who seem to be absolutely identical, or perhaps would start nuking Iran sooner. The nation has a crisis, and as I said in the beginning, my view is that there are three urgent steps. The reinstatement of Glass-Steagall, the restoration of a Hamiltonian banking system as it states in our Constitution, where the Congress has the authority to issue credit for great projects, and the construction of NAWAPA. And I would ask that people here, whether or not you choose to support my candidacy or my campaign, commit yourselves to fighting on principle for what you know to be right, and to have the courage to stand up against perceived popular opinion. Because only if the American people begin to do that are we going to save our nation.